Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. Dr. Federico Magdalena is currently a faculty specialist and an associate director of the Center for Philippine Studies at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. His research specializations are on Mindanao, Islam, Philippine society and culture, and globalization of cultures. Among his publications are Davao Ko and Winning of Mindanao, 2009, The Battle of Bayang and Other Essays on Moroland, 2002, The Chinese in Moroland, 2001, and more recently, Why Are the Moros Absent in Jose Rizal's Writings, 2020. Fred obtained his PhD degree in sociology from the University of Hawaii at Manoa, his MA degree from the University of the Philippines at Diliman, and his BA degree from the Mindanao State University in Marawi City. He currently serves as the archivist of the Knights of Rizal Aloha chapter. Let's welcome Dr. Fred Magdalena.
Thank you very much, Tim and June. I would like to welcome everybody, especially our friends from Mindanao, in particular Mindanao State University in Marawi and Iligan, and other places where there are MSU alumni. I can see James Manti coming in. I think it's in Manila. Okay, let me start my presentation by showing you some slides. Okay, here's my prepared presentation, which is titled Jose Rizal's Legacy in Mindanao. Okay, and I prepared a number of items which I will discuss as I go. I hope I'll be able to cover everything in 45 minutes. Okay. Okay, here's the content of my presentation in a bird's eye view. And I would like to focus of all the legacies that I will mention on politics and governance, which I would say is the legacy of legacies. And then I will wind up with my analysis of what Rizal contributed to Mindanao and to the entire nation. Okay. Rizal, as we know, is a multi-dimensional global man. The Jose Rizal University describes him in 37 different ways, but I just listed a few, and I emphasize his being a writer and a nationalist, although some would argue against this, especially some noted historians in Manila who are not agreeable to calling Rizal a nationalist. Anyway, my title uses the word in singular, legacy instead of legacies, because I think everything can be summarized by one important contribution, which I will discuss later. And finally, I would like to say something about my positionality. I'm a sociologist, not a historian. So I'm not keen about dates or events in chronological fashion, but instead I'm more interested in social interactions in the past, which matter and which will enable me to connect the dots that some may have missed or taken for granted. Let me start with Dapitan, the island of Mindanao, in the island of Mindanao, where Rizal's story in this presentation begins. Okay, I'll show you a map of Mindanao first, and then take you to a quick tour of what um, Rizal did. Okay, this is the map of Mindanao. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it. Um, what happened? Anyway, this is not the map that I wanted to show, but anyway, I would like to show you what is inside the Rizal Park and Shrine in Dapitan, where Rizal stayed for a little over 4 years between 1892 and 1896. Let me show you some of the things that he did while on exile. Okay. Um, well, while there, the first thing he did was to construct a house. This is called the Casa de Redonda, which he used to house his students and also some visitors. In the beginning, he had only 16 students, but then the number grew to more than 30. I don't know how they fit into this small house. Maybe there's another cottage where the students uh, stayed. Anyway, this is the um, entrance to the Rizal Shrine. This was not here when I visited Dapitan many years back. This is the museum.
Excuse
Yes.
me, Fred. That it's not showing.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's not showing. Oh my goodness. I think how do I share that? Anyway, we can forgo with the tour. I just wanted to. I'm sorry about it. I don't know how to share the map, which is taken from Google. Okay, this is where I started showing something, but it's not allowing me to give you a tour.
Did you try
So
to click on the link? Maybe if you click on that link on your slide, maybe it'll
yes,
take.
the link is um, shows you the map of Mindanao, including the Pitan. Okay, where you can type Rizal Park and Shrine, and you will be able to see what is inside Rizal Shrine in terms of buildings that he constructed before and the newer infrastructures that were added after he died. So anyway, let's forego the showing of the Rizal Shrine. Um, while in Dapitan, from July 1892 to August 1896, um, Rizal did many things. You might ask me why he was deported in Dapitan in the first place. The first sentence gives you an idea of the charges that were leveled against Rizal. And later on, he was deported there. And his 4 years exile was considered by many researchers as his last, but the most fruitful and most relevant to the 21st century. He established a model community there where he demonstrated his ability as, you know, an engineer without going to an engineering college. He was good at agribusiness, etc., etc. And one of his students by the name of Jose Asenero became governor of Zamboanga in 1929. His grandson was a reactor to Floro Kiboyan's lecture some time ago that Testa Berdo mentioned. But Rizal's legacies extended far beyond Dapitan. It actually reverberated throughout Las Islas Filipinas after he died in 1896 at age uh, 35. Okay, uh, Rizal had tremendous influence on some Filipino groups, particularly the Katipunan, who started the revolution in 1896. But the relation between Rizal and the Katipunan is kind of one-way traffic. Okay, it's the Katipunan that was trying to establish relations with Rizal, but Rizal was not in any way connected with them. He was not a member, although he was named as the honorary president, and the password of all Katipuneros is Rizal. Rizal never knew about these things. The Katipunan also venerates Rizal very much, according to a film writer from New York who published a book with the subtitle From Indios Bravos to Filipinos, which is borrowed from Rizal himself. Um, Prior to his exile in Dapitan, Rizal established an organization called La Liga Filipina, which became the cornerstone of the Katipunan. This did not last long. I think only about 3 days or 3 weeks. And Rizal was arrested. Uh, among the people who became members of the La Liga Filipina and also established the Katipunan include these names that I listed: Andres Bonifacio, Ladislao Diwa, Teodoro Plata, a brother-in-law of Andres Bonifacio himself, and several others who started uh, the Katipunan Secret Society shortly after Rizal was arrested. Okay. Um, Rizal was deported to Dapitan July 7. I think he took the boat about July 10 and he reached Mindanao about July 17. During that time, the Katipunan was already under a process of intense organization. Actually, they started meeting, and the members of the Katipunan said that the organization actually started on the day that Rizal was arrested, or on the day that he was proclaimed, uh, for deportation by Governor Dispohor, the Spanish Governor General at the time. Okay. One of the things that happened in the Pitan was the meeting between Dr. Pio Valenzuela, who was the emissary of Andres Bonifacio, and they met shortly after Rizal's birthday, June 21, and Valenzuela asked Rizal to support the cause of the Katipunan, but Rizal um, disagreed with the idea because he was not sold to launching a revolution which was premature, and that um, instead he gave advice to Dr. Valenzuela how to go about it. Um, on the whole, the meeting was not satisfactory because Dr. Valenzuela came home empty-handed without nothing to say to Andres Bonifacio when they met in Manila. Now, this is one of the pictures that show how the Katipuneros idolize Rizal. You can see that they always carry a picture with him, or a picture of Rizal with them. Um, this was the founding document of the Katipunan, which they started formulating as early as January of 1892, but the draft, the final draft of it was made sometime in August. Several drafts actually were made on the document, and the last to edit the covenant was Andres Bonifacio himself, and it was dated August 1892. This document is found in the archives of Madrid and also reproduced in some online sources in the Philippines, um, which are available for viewing by anyone who is interested in the Katipunan. I put below the source of this document, which you can Google to find out what is in it. Now, one thing about Rizal and the Katipunan was that uh, the covenant speaks very highly about Rizal. Um, and I discovered one paragraph that actually links Rizal to the cause of the Katipunan. This is written in Tagalog after being deciphered by people who knew something about it. Okay, I made a translation of the Tagalog text, and this is it. Okay, um, this is how it goes from my own translation. But there is an English original translation which you can also see below. Okay, there is a slight difference, but I think my translation is more direct to the point. Okay, um, you can have a copy of the PowerPoint later. I'm not going to read these things for lack of time. Okay, now there is something in Mindanao that happened shortly after Rizal left Dapitan after completing his exile in August. About a month later, there was a mutiny in a place called Calaganan. This was the Spanish report, and several sources talk about the Calaganan mutiny, which is a misspelling of the real name of the place. I asked Mona Linda Doro, who is here, that actually there's no Calaganan in Baloi where it was said, to have happened. Uh, but there is a Kalanganan, which is now in Pantar, previously a part of Balui town. Okay, so many things have been written and published about the Kalaganan mutiny, and one of the guys who always write about it, almost every year, is Mike Banyos. You can see the name of the author here. Very small, very difficult to look at, but the title of the work, the latest that he published, was The Forgotten Katipunan Revolt in Mindanao. Now, the Kalaganan Mutiny is a story about 354 disciplinarios who staged a mutiny because they were not satisfied with the treatment they received from their Spanish superiors. So they killed all of them and captured all the firearms uh, and decided to go down to Iligan and proceed to Cagayan de Oro and finally to Butuan. Okay, the mutiny actually could be called a revolt because it's not just vengeance against Spanish officers, but it constituted a full-blown uprising by a group of people who um, who wanted to uh, effect change, not only in Mindanao but also in the Philippines. Um, Below, you can see one of the creations of the disciplinarios. Those who are from MSU and who graduated from MSU Marawi will remember the Pantar Bridge. Okay, this was created by these disciplinarios who were based in Pantar. Originally, they were from Fort Victoria in Iligan, but at the time, they were stationed in Pantar because they're only about 10 minutes away from the site of the construction, which you can see here. The Pantar Bridge was completed sometime in September 1895, and they used this even prior to its completion to attack Marawi, in the same year, some months before they completed the bridge, uh, Governor General Ramon Blanco decided to attack Marawi, and he killed the famous leader of the Maranao, Amay Pakpak. Okay, so these are the interconnections between the disciplinarios and the Moro people. Okay, this is how the disciplinarios are described by sources. They are all, if not nearly all, Tagalogs from Luzon, and they were prisoners deported by the Spanish authorities to fight against the Moros. And one of the major accomplishments or tasks of the disciplinarios is the 1895 attack on Marawi, which resulted in the death of Amay Pakpak. Okay, the disciplinarios are a mixed bag of prisoners, renegade soldiers who were enlisted by the Spanish government, captured Katipuleros, and suspected rebels who were deported to Fort Victoria. Fort Victoria is in Iligan. Those of you who have been to Lanao will probably uh, know where Iligan is relative to Pantar and Balui. I'll show you a map later. The disciplinarios were not content with using their own force. They recruited Manobo warriors from Bukidnon and also from the outskirts of Lanao to attack Spanish garrisons all the way from Iligan to Misamis and finally to Butuan. Okay. Now the uprising lasted actually more than 7 months, 7 months and 10 days in my counting. Okay, which began in September 29, but ended in June 12, 1897. One of the things that the mutiny uh, means to people is that it could be taken as part of the Katipunan Revolt, the eighth race of the Philippine flag, symbolizing the 8 provinces that revolted against Spain. If it can be proven that they were connected really with the Katipunan uprising, probably this will merit the ninth ray of the Philippine flag, according to some local historians. But that's not our point here. This is a picture of Fort Victoria in Iligan. This was taken from a drawing by our staff in MSU. Dr. Saber, already died, keeps the original photograph, but it's so blurred that it needs to be redrawn for better effect. So this is how it looks like. Um, there is no more remnant that you can see of the Fort Victoria today, except some stones that are still found on the bank of the river, close to the Philippine National Bank in Iligan. Now, this is the map showing the distance between Fort Victoria and Kalanganan. It's about 20 kilometers distance or 40 minutes drive by car. Um, this is another drawing that I tried to construct based on the readings that I made, especially of Greg Huntiveros and other sources. Okay, you can see in the map the distance between Dapitan, where Rizal was staying for 4 years, and the Kalanganan mutineers who began from Pantar and moved east towards Cagayan de Oro, passing by Iligan and enlisting some members all the way until there is probably more than 400 upon reaching Cagayan de Oro. Okay. The red path shows a distance of about 360 kilometers or 220 miles between Kalanganan and Butuan, including Cagayan de Oro and Bukidnon. In Bukidnon, they reach as far as Malaybalay, according to sources. But that meant the uh, splitting of the group into two. Some were left behind or were killed in Bukidnon. Others proceeded to Hingoog, where they met uh, uh, fighters among the Filipino natives and also Spaniards before they proceeded to Butuan, where they were finished completely because there were just very few of them left. Um, the path of the mutineers covered about 4 provinces: Lanao, Kalanganan, Misamis, which included all the towns between Iligan and Cagayan de Oro, all the way to Hinguog. Okay, but some of the groups went as far as Bukidnon, and the remnants of these disciplinarios proceeded to Butuan, where they were finished by the Spanish forces and native volunteers. This is another phase of the revolution against the Americans this time, where we have names of people who were involved in the uprising or in the defense of the Republic. Some of them were connected with the Katipunan, like General Vicente Alvarez. Um, he was in touch with Bonifacio as early as 1892 and supplied him with vital information about Spanish policy, movements, and other activities that would help the Katipunan in their cause to stage a revolution. Okay. Of course, General Alvarez also proclaimed the Republic of Zamboanga shortly after um, the defeat of the Spanish forces. The last Spanish Governor General was actually in Zamboanga at that time, and he surrendered to Vicente Alvarez, after which he proclaimed the Republic of Zamboanga, which lasted for about 3 years, well into the start of the American regime under the Moro province. In Western Misamis, or what is now Misamis Occidental, there is another guy who fought the Americans, General Rufino de Loso. One of our faculty members from MSU made her thesis on the uprising there, and she discussed Rufino de Loso. I got some materials about this guy from the archives of Washington, D.C., and I gave these materials to her, which is why she was able to paint a picture of the revolution in Misamis. One thing good about Rufino de Loso is that he kept on fighting, and according to records, he engaged the Americans in no less than 20 encounters or fights. And even if Aguinaldo already surrendered to the American authorities, he kept on fighting for another year or two, and even went to Lanao to encourage some more fighters to join him, but to no avail. The last name that you see here, or two names that you see, are Nicolas Capistrano and Vicente Roa. And General Nicolas Capistrano fought heavily against the forces of the Americans, and he was victorious in some of the wars there, including Vicente Roa. But Nicolas Capistrano stayed well into the 1920s when he became the mayor of Cagayan de Oro. The last guy that you see here is important to mention because he was the person, a leader of the voluntario, who stopped the disciplinarios in Himuo. He volunteered his services to the Spanish government and went to Hinguog and fought against these disciplinarios who lost in the battle. Now let's come to the present. Jose Rizal contributed many things to Mindanao and also throughout the Philippines. And education-wise, there are 4 universities that bear Jose Rizal's name, and one of them happens to be located in Mindanao. Okay, the Jose Rizal Mindanao State University in the Pitan City. Okay, the 3 others are all found in the Rizal province. 2 of them are public, and one is private. The oldest being founded in 1919, Jose Rizal University. And of course, so we all know that Rizal is known to all Filipino students. Nobody will graduate without taking a Rizal course because it is mandated in all levels of the, all, I would say, educational types, public or private, in the tertiary level. This is a website showing the Jose Rizal Memorial State University. In the picture you see here is the president herself, Dr. Dailinda Lapot. This is history of the JRMSU. It is the youngest of the 4 universities that I showed earlier, and it was an institution that evolved from a lowly origin, from a college to a university. And here's some information about how big JRMSU is in terms of faculty and students in the 4 or 5 campuses that it has at present. Now let's move on to what Rizal contributed to society and culture. We see that Rizal icons are found all over the place. His statue is ubiquitous. You find it in almost every public plaza in the Philippines, and many streets in the Philippines are named after Jose Rizal. But there are also people whose first or last name is Rizal. I just listed some of those that I encountered. Rizal Ali, a notorious guy from Sulu, Rizal Yuitong, a publisher, Rizal Buendia, a researcher on Mindanao, Rizalino and Rizalina. Rizalina uh, happens to be the name of one of the listeners, a Filipina educator who is based in Arizona teaching K-12 children of the Navajo in one of the counties very close to Grand Canyon. And of course, the Knights of Rizal are captive tourists, and many of them, I'm sure, have pledged to visit the Rizal Shrine before they die. Um, this is not a good contribution of Rizal, but some people revere Rizal so much that they think he was like God. One of the organizations even proclaimed that he is the Filipino Christ. Okay, and there have been many studies about this, even pictures that I will show later. Okay. Now I have a little quiz on Rizal Monument. I'm just thinking about it. Dr. John Colmenares will probably help me out here as timer. Okay. Uh, and the question to be answered in 10 minutes. Please raise your hand or write the word me in the chat if you know the answer, okay? The question is this: where do you find the tallest Rizal monument in the world today? No Googling, please. Can we start the timing for 10 minutes?
10 seconds.
10 seconds, I'm sorry.
10 seconds.
10 seconds. Is it time now, June?
Not yet.
Not yet, okay.
Okay, time's up.
Time's up. Nobody has
Somebody mentioned Luneta.
Luneta. Okay. Sorry, that's not correct. The answer is Xinjiang in Fujian province in China. And the height of the monument is measured in the same year that Rizal was born, 1861. Okay, so it measured 18 meters and 0.61. Okay, so it's about 6 meters higher than the Luneta monument. Actually, this is it. Okay, you'll find that in Fujian province. I think those people that you see there are Filipinos. Okay, this is a picture of Rizal, who is venerated like God. But anyway, this is something that probably will interest you to find out why. And one of the lecturers in our series, Floro Kiboyen, wrote a monograph entitled "The Case of the Ciudad Mística de Dios," which is a case study of what's happening in Mount Banahaw among the cultist organization there who believe that Christ is like Rizal or vice versa. Okay, you can Google this later and find out how Floro described the CMD, Ciudad Mística de Dios. Okay, now let's come to this point now, which I think would sum up the best contributions of Rizal. Okay, in terms of legislation, we know that there are many places, towns and barangays, streets, organizations, etc. Even national or local holidays that are made after Rizal, like Rizal Day is a national holiday, and the birthday of Rizal is a holiday in Laguna. Recently, President Duterte proclaimed it as a holiday in Laguna to be observed every year thereafter, not just in 2018 when he made the proclamation. Okay, there are many towns that are made or named after Rizal, and two of them are actually in Mindanao. One of them is in Palawan. In the Dapitan City, most of the major streets are named after Rizal or people who worked with him or associated with him in fiction or in real life. Okay, I listed the names there, including his two novels. And lastly, an advertisement for the Knights of Rizal. Okay, the KOR is actually a legislative act. Its charter was made possible by President Elpidio Quirino in 1951. And this is the only civic, patriotic, and cultural organization that is recognized by the government. Okay, now this is the most important part of his political contributions. Okay, Rizal's legacy in 20th and early 21st centuries was most significant in terms of building the nascent Philippine nation. And I would like to follow it up by saying that the presence of Rizal in the Katipunan, later the revolutionaries under President Aguinaldo, who was the supremo of the Katipunan Magdalo faction. Okay. This fortified the claim that Mindanao, the second largest region, was actually part of the Philippine map. Okay. Without Rizal in the Katipunan, this would not be possible. And the danger, if Rizal or the Katipunan was not involved in the making of Mindanao as part of the Philippine map.
Legacy in Mindanao ba?
Mindanao could have
Rizal's
been,
legacy in Mindanao. Mga kabataang pangarap ni Rizal ba?
I'm sorry.
Can you please unmute?
Please unmute your microphone. The idea here, which I couldn't cover in this webinar, but maybe a future forum will allow us to talk about it. And if you are interested, I wrote a little feature article on this. Write me if you need to know more about it. I'll just discuss some nitty gritty of Rizal's and the Katipunan's influence on making Mindanao as part of the Philippines. In 1926, the Philippines almost lost Mindanao to the United States. I don't know how many of us know about or remember the 1926 Bacon Bill. The congressman from New York, Robert Bacon, filed a bill in the US Congress trying to detach Mindanao from the Philippine jurisdiction and make it as a permanent territory of the United States. That was 1926 when Hawaii was not yet aspiring to become, one of the states. In fact, the position of the Hawaiians was kind of negative. They did not like to become a state of the USA. So I won't discuss this further, but as I've said, I could send you a copy of the feature article that I wrote about it, so that you'll know something about this um, danger to the separation of Mindanao in 1926. I would like to summarize the legacy of Rizal in terms of what it is. It boils down to the idea of nationalism or love of country. In Tagalog, pagmamahal sa inang bayan. And in terms of nation building, its most important contribution to Mindanao in the country is the acceptance of identity, which is paraphrased by Rizal himself, from Indios Bravos to Filipinos. Okay, before Filipinos were called Indios, and Filipinos were Spaniards who were born in the Philippines. Rizal said something about that, uh, and from then on, the natives started to be called Filipinos, just like the Spaniards who were born from the islands. Um, he also inspired the revolt of the masses, the Katipunan, against Spanish colonialism. And through the Katipunan, Mindanao was incorporated into Las Islas Filipinas because one of the stars in the Philippine flag and also one of the rays in the flag itself speaks about Mindanao being part of the Philippines. Okay? And of course, Las Islas Filipinas was no longer plural, although until now some people still use R to describe PI or Philippine Islands. And lastly, through Rizal, the perfection of the Philippines as a concept of a nation or a state, materialized. And this is made possible through his link with the Katipunan. And I show this in terms of syllogism of the variables x, y, z. If x equals y and y equals z, then x equals z. That's the logical conclusion. And by x, y, and z, I mean these terms. Okay. This is how the Philippine flag evolved as influenced by the Katipunan flag. If you look at the last two flags close to the Philippine flag, these are the flags of two important leaders, Pio del Pilar and Marcelo del Pilar, okay, who were commanders of their own troops against the Spaniards. This was the flag that was raised by President Emilio Aguinaldo on June 12, 1898 in Cavite. Okay? This is how it evolved in terms of colors since 1898. I won't discuss the variations in colors, but you can see that the colors are actually changing themselves, the blue and the red especially. And finally, I would like to conclude with two statements. following the legacy of Rizal, leaving behind an indelible imprint in Mindanao and nationally. Two things come to my mind. First, Mindanao became an integral part of the Philippines. And second, the concept of Philippine nation. Rizal was undoubtedly an important factor in these two events or processes that affected Mindanao and also the country. Of course, there are some questions about the 21st century, and I pose this in terms of the $64 questions. I'm not going to answer them, but I will leave them for the viewers and listeners to ponder about. Thank you very much, and I'm now ready for the Q&A.
Mahalo and thank you, Sir Fred, for that informative and very interesting lecture. Before I call on our reactor, I would like to remind the participants again to write questions they want to ask in our chat room, and we will read them after the reaction. Thank you. I now take pleasure in introducing our reactor to the presentation. Dr. Jason Parba is an instructor and the coordinator of the Filipino and Philippine Language and Literature program at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. He hails from Cagayan de Oro City in the Philippines. He obtained his BSE and MA degrees from Xavier University, Ateneo de Cagayan in the Philippines, and his PhD degree from the University of Hawaii at Manoa. Please welcome our reactor, Dr. Jason Parba.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Is it morning over there in the Philippines? It's morning. Maayong buntag sa tanan. Thank you so much, Dr. Magdalena, for that interesting and thought-provoking presentation, including those three $64 questions, which also challenge us to rethink and reframe our understanding of Rizal and his politics. What was that? I first learned about Rizal as a young kid in the Philippines in my Kasaysayan ng Pilipinas class, and learned more about him when I took my Philippine history and Rizal courses at the university. And as Dr. Magdalena mentioned earlier, Rizal is a mandatory university course for all students in the Philippines. My impression of Rizal back then was more of a romanticization of his life, as he's often portrayed as this larger-than-life character in our history books. I guess some of us have the same, image of Rizal. And
can we please ask people to mute themselves?
And Sir Fred, maybe you can also stop sharing.
Yeah.
So
you
can...
Go ahead, Jason. I was about to say what you are going to tell us, Manong Fred, to do.
Sir Fred, if you could stop sharing your screen.
Hello?
Sir Fred, if you could stop sharing your screen.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. That's better.
That's better. Okay.
Sorry about that.
There's a background noise too. If you could also mute whoever is talking right now. All right. As Dr. Magdalena mentioned earlier, Rizal is a mandatory university course for all students in the Philippines. And my impression of Rizal back then was more of a romanticization of his life, as he's often portrayed as this larger-than-life character in our history books. I think many of us have this image of Rizal. And as also a product of Jesuit education, I went to Xavier University. I always thought highly of him because, in Ateneo, we're taught to be men and women for others, and the concept of magis or more, like to do more, to give more, to love more, has been taught to us. So as you heard earlier, he was well-traveled, highly educated, and spoke several languages. And in other words, in spite of the oppression and the bad treatment that he and his family received from the Spanish friars and government, I would say that he still enjoyed a lot of privilege compared to the rest of the Filipinos during that time. And there is, of course, no doubt that Rizal made a solid contribution to our country, especially in reimagining the islands as a unified and organized nation with citizens who are equal and afforded rights and freedom. So today's lecture by Dr. Magdalena is very interesting to me because we see another side of Rizal, or a part of him that is often rarely discussed in history classes. By focusing on his exiled life, we got to know Rizal better as a human being or as a living person with emotions. I'm sure that Rizal was angry at the injustices he received from the Spaniards. At the same time, I think Rizal also had fears about his family and his own future. In fact, his exile in the Pitan provided the protection that his family needed during those turbulent years. Some sources would say that. And in movies that portrayed Rizal, we often see him as fearless and logical. But I'm sure that there were also times when he had doubts about his friends when he was exiled because he did not perhaps receive some help, and he felt some disappointment over Katipunan's overexcitement for independence, and also perhaps regrets over returning home, right? Because he came back home in spite of, his stay, and I think he kind of like enjoyed his stay in Europe, although I think he was also running out of cash, and that's why he eventually came back to the Philippines. When I was a kid, I was always curious about Rizal's life in Mindanao, and because I come from Mindanao, when you're a student, it's really discussed in books like what really happened when Rizal was in Mindanao or in the Pitan. I grew up in Bukidnon and Cagayan de Oro City, by the way. So when reading and learning about Rizal, I was always curious when he was exiled over there in Mindanao. What we knew is that Rizal engaged with the community. And some sources say, and as presented by Dr. Magdalena, for instance, that Rizal actually cultivated land, right, and worked with the farmers in Zamboanga and treated the sick. He opened up a clinic there, and even put up a dormitory for boys. However, I was curious if Rizal's strong desire for education applied to all, and if it also manifested during his challenging life in the Pitan. So Dr. Magdalena's lecture has given us an idea that besides serving as a community doctor, Rizal also taught the children in the Pitan and in nearby towns. We know that. Now, this got me curious because the Rizal that we know as well, as that's the Rizal that we know was well traveled and educated. And I was wondering about, what lessons did he actually teach the kids? Did he actually teach them about sustainable development, which is a more recent catchphrase, right? Or a more recent concept, perhaps not recent among indigenous peoples. It was already there, but it's more a recent term that is used by people nowadays. And did he teach the children about geography and cultures around the world? And did he teach them about the concept of nation and identity? And additionally, and perhaps more importantly, we also know that Rizal encouraged women to get some education through his letter to the women of Malolos. If you read that letter, it's part of our readings when we were in college. But when he was in the Pitan, I was curious if he perhaps taught the girls and encouraged them to pursue their dreams as well, because I noticed that the records showed only boys. He taught the boys in the Pitan. But I was curious, what was Rizal thinking? Why did he? I don't know. Like, did he actually perhaps the girls? Perhaps somebody should investigate this for future discussions and talks. And some sources also say that while in the Pitan, Rizal was actually bitter and in despair because he believed that he was innocent and did not deserve the treatment that he got from the Spaniards. We also learned that after 4 years, he left to join a medical mission in Cuba. However, I have been personally to the Pitan in 2012. I was lucky enough to be able to travel there. And I think it was actually a good experience because as a student of Rizal and as Filipino, I think it's really worth visiting that place and understanding. I think it's a good way to understand Rizal's life. Um, and knowing that Rizal loved to travel and was an ilustrado, we know that he's quite privileged. I wondered, while he was there, I wondered if it was boredom. that really pushed him to ask permission to leave for Cuba eventually. When I went to the Pitan, the ocean was inviting. I think Zamboanga is, I think, very beautiful. I would love to visit again. And but still, while I was standing, next to a replica of his house facing the ocean, I wondered if Rizal reached his limit and was already bored of living a mundane life. And so I also wondered if Rizal would have lived longer had he decided to stay in the Pitan. Had he stayed in the Pitan, perhaps he could have evaded the prying gaze of the Spaniards who were aggressively finding ways to get rid of him. So those are, the things that I wondered and thought of while I was listening to the lecture, and also as a student of Jose Rizal, his life and works. And again, I would like to thank Dr. Magdalena for the thought-provoking lecture. It surely does challenge us to read and learn more about Rizal's life, especially aspects of his life that are not given attention in our everyday discussions about his legacy and contribution to nation building. Thank you so much. Og maayong adlaw sa inyong tanan.